Okay, so welcome everybody, and today we are going to start our discussion about the Great Depression and the New Deal, and we'll see all these kind of images will help tell the story of the time period from 1929 to 1941. So what we have here are our essential questions. These are kind of the big ideas that we're going to be talking about over the next days, and so one has to relate to basically the Great Depression. Is said to have changed the relationship between the people and the government, and how and in what ways is that true? So life is not what it was for the citizens of our country after the Great Depression. It's significantly different. And why didn't all of the legislation produced in the Roosevelt years, also called the New Deal, cure? Why didn't all the problems go away? That's another big question we're going to try to answer. So we're going to talk at 4 different times about the Great Depression and the New Deal. So first, today we're going to talk about the causes. Next, we'll talk the effects. After that, actions and effectiveness, and to wrap it up, New Deal programs. So today, what we're really talking about are 7 different causes. Now, there's lots more causes, and there's a lot of discussion among history people about actually what are the main causes, but I'm going to talk to you about 7 of them. So wealth, income, and distribution, meaning who has money and who doesn't. Speculation and the risk of entering in on financial transactions and what's called buying on margin. We'll talk about the stock market crash, overproduction, which is how much of goods and services do we produce, unemployment, and bank failures and foreclosures, and finally the Federal Reserve System, the people who make our money. So getting into some of the details, income and wealth. During the 20s, there was a pretty big wealth gap which existed between the rich and the poor, meaning there was a middle class, but the middle class did expand, but didn't expand at the same rates, in particular as the wealthiest class in our country. And we'll see that ultimately consumers, upper, middle, or lower class, their demand did not meet or equal the supply of that companies were trying to produce, and mostly that's related to the fact that credit created a false demand, meaning that if people bought goods using credit, companies kind of misinterpreted the demand for their product. So to get to a little bit more specific, we can see that wages start here in 1921, and there is significant income gains in the 20s. Pretty significant when you're talking, 25 billion or so. But if we look at it a little bit differently, 1% of Americans right here hold a little over 70% of the nation's wealth, and the rest of the 99% of the country holds about a little less or more than 10%, around somewhere around there. So we can see that's pretty significant. In fact, people would also bring up this statistic in contemporary times. Today, you might have heard of this word, the 99% or the 1%. So we're seeing some parallels between the past and the present. Also, we can look at one last set of data I think that is good to talk about when we're talking about wealth and income, and that is wages. The average wage kind of ebbs and flows, but for the most part doesn't grow significantly in the 20s, and dips here obviously during the Great Depression, and then we see a gradual raising of the wages. So really there was gains, but it mattered who you were and what you were doing. Additionally, speculation is kind of the practice of making financial decisions in hopes of turning a quick buck. So you might buy a stock and then sell it, and that is related to this idea of buying on margin. But really quick, I think this quote really tells the story. If a man saves $15 a week and invests in good common stock and allows the dividends and rights to accumulate, at the end of the 20 years, he will have at least $80,000 in an income from investments of around $400 a month. He will be rich. And because income can do that, I am in the firm belief that anyone not only can be rich, but ought to be rich. So there was this idea in the 20s of an endless possibility of wealth, and that John J. Rascom, and others really believed in this. A lot of Americans bought into this idea of perpetual wealth. And so buying on margin, a little bit more specifically, is when people would buy stocks, they would pay not full price, and they wouldn't pay all of their money. They would actually, in fact, borrow money to buy a stock. And that system works when you sell the stock, you pay off what you had borrowed. But if the stock becomes worth less or worthless, compared to the price you bought it, then you're in a bit of a hole. And that has to do with speculation, which is buying and selling stocks or other things. Today, with the Great Recession, we saw a lot of speculation with property, and people got burned there. But this is buying and selling in hopes of making some quick money. And so a couple other quotes that will kind of highlight the ideas of the time. Will Payne, a major investor on Wall Street, said that the stock exchange has become such an easy way to make money, it ceased to be a gamble, because in gamble, someone loses. But when invested in stocks and shares, everybody wins. So this idea of everybody wins is really a key part of the cause of the Great Depression, because everybody thought there was no risk involved. They were willing to put in a lot more money than was probably actually wise or reasonable. And people thought the market could sustain the high prices that they've had. We can see over here in this picture, we'll see a bigger version, but up, up, and away. And then, like most bubbles, they come crashing down. But stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau, says Irving Fisher. So the speculation and buying on margin kind of continues with this frenzy as a record share of shares are traded and bought and sold in October 24th, and then on October 29th that streak is broken by a lot more, so 16 million shares, which is pretty significant. And we'll see that that won't be repeated until 1969. So there was often a lot of crowds around the stock exchange, but people also around the country really contributed or participated in the stock market in buying and selling shares. And we'll see this is another version of that picture, right? Kind of the Dow Jones, or the average stock in the stock market, goes up, up, and up pretty significantly from the late 20s. And then we'll see a big drop as people get worried, and then there's a little bit of a rebound, and then we see the long march down to the Great Depression where the market hits the low. And this is pretty significant, and this drop in stocks is what's called Black Tuesday. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But some stats to kind of go along with that and paint a little bit more of a picture is, 12 million people are out of work because of the stock market. And it's not necessarily directly, I guess, related to the stock market, but companies who had stocks, their value went down, and they perceived that their business and their profits were going to go down, and the quickest way to reduce your expenses is to cut your workers, either their pay or just lay them off or fire them. 12,000 people were made unemployed every day. That's a lot, adding to the unemployment numbers. 20,000 companies and 1,600 banks go bankrupt, and 23,000 people commit suicide, a year high up to that point. So some pretty significant social changes and economic changes as a result of the stock market crash. And by the end, we lost $30 million in over that week. And that is 10 times more than the federal government spent at the time, and more than all of the money spent on World War I. So those kind of give you an idea of the significance of the Great Depression. And Black Tuesday is kind of the official start of the Great Depression. As the market crashed, people really lose confidence, and fear becomes a pretty significant emotion that people experience as a result of this financial uncertainty and, to some degree, chaos. So we can see another example is stock prices going up, 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 up on the 3rd, and then down, 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 down on the 13th. And we can see some significant losses by companies. So Radio loses 94% of its stock value. Same with General Motors and Woolworth. Some companies fare better than others. So we can see places like New York Central or American Can fare a little bit better, but nevertheless significant losses for most companies. These would be a bad year, let alone a bad couple days. Another factor is overproduction. So there was a consumeristic boom when people bought vacuums or toasters or cars or whatever consumer item they were really interested in, and companies began to produce a lot of products, and consumers couldn't afford them, especially as unemployment started to rise, and there was companies began to fire their workers. So simply the demand didn't match up with the supply. The supply was greater than the demand. And this is a cycle to kind of explain that. So as farms and factories overproduced, right, businesses cut production. So they stop producing as much, which basically means they don't have workers. So workers suffer because they either lose their money, their wages, or they lose their job. And because people have less money or little money, they spend less. And because of that, demand falls. And then we see the cycle repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. So we can see this kind of downhill spiral of sorts all the way to the bottom. And the issue is, how do you get that to start to reverse, right? But not there yet. That's where we'll get in the future. So unemployment skyrockets, right, from 29 all the way to 33. We'll see other countries join us, though, in the Great Depression. The British and the Germans, anyone involved in world trade really sees a huge decline. We'll talk more about why that might be a little bit later on. But the big issue is one, economies slow down, trade decreases, but also people paying the United States government debt. They owed us money from the war. That dries up as well. So there's significant issues here when the Great Depression hits globally. And the Federal Reserve System is one of the last causes of the Great Depression. The Fed is kind of the organization responsible for what's called monetary policy, but basically controlling the money supply and due to that, the interest rate. So they significantly increased the money supply by 61% by relaxing what's called the gold standard. At the time, you could trade in your dollar or dollars for a certain amount of gold, or dollars were backed by a certain amount of gold, and that lowers the cost of having loans during this 21 to 29 period. But as the economy started to show risk, the Fed's job is to keep the economy on track, and so they reduced or limited the money supply, and that made the cost of loans increase. And so the decision to limit the money supply really is seen as one of the causes. We can look at a couple statistics to help tell the story. So we see industrial production tank. This is going to be bad for places like Toledo. Wholesale prices of goods goes way down as well. We'll see the money supply, right, increases here in the 20s, and this creates this kind of boom, and we see a spike and then a shrinking in the money supply. And then overall, the deposits of closed banks. So we'll see a significant increase, and that's not good news. And bank failures and foreclosures is another cause. When the stock market crashed, people couldn't repay their loans to their banks, and banks often don't have a lot of money in their safes because they loan that money out to other people. That's how banks make their money. And if banks can't pay their depositors or people who have accounts, then there was a banking crisis because people lost faith in banks. And if you don't have money, then you're not a bank. You are bankrupt. And so banks closed, and many people lost their life savings. There was no guarantee that the bank or anybody else would pay back that money. And really what that caused is what's called a bank run, when people would rush to withdraw as much money as they could. And a run on the bank really is bad news, right, for the economy, and bad news for people individually. Additionally, it just wasn't banks, also homes and businesses and farms go up for sale as people aren't able to pay their bills, as they lose their money. And a foreclosure is simply when a lender seizes the property due to back or lack of payment or back payment. And we can see three pictures that kind of tell the story, right? World's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. And we can see a bread line, people waiting to be fed by either a government agency or a private charity. And jobless men keep on moving, right? And then this guy trying to hawk his car for $100 because he lost all his money in the market. So a quick review is these are the causes